From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. 3 battleground states see big developments today as Georgia's election board votes for a new hand-counting ballot rule that could delay its results for weeks or months. And the Supreme Court rules that Nevada's ballot will not include the Green Party. This as fallout continues in North Carolina from a scandalous report engulfing its Republican gubernatorial candidate, Mark Robinson. We'll hear from the current Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, this hour. Plus, we'll look abroad at the conflicts in both the Middle East and Ukraine. Former National Security Council official Hagar Chemali and Poland's Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski will join me. But we begin on this Friday evening with Vice President Harris campaigning in the swing state of Georgia and Wisconsin today, riling up a crowd in Atlanta as she called out the states that have restrictive abortion bans.
1 in 3 women in America lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban. This includes Georgia and every state in the South except Virginia. These hypocrites want to start talking about this is in the best interest of women and children. Well, where you been? Where you been when it comes to taking care of the women and children of America?
Former President Trump, for his part, will be taking his campaign to North Carolina tomorrow. We'll have more on that state in just a minute. But want to stick in Georgia now as I bring in Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, because it's not just Georgia being in the news as Harris highlights reproductive freedom there today, but also because the state's election board with Trump allies on it has voted for new rules that will require the hand counting of ballots there. Does that mean we're not going to know who won Georgia for a really long time?
Kelly, very likely could mean significant delays in finding out the results of this state. And remember that 4 years ago, this was a very closely contested location. And we even saw it become the focus of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election results and seize upon how tight the race was there. Now, in the move today by the Republican-led Republican majority state election board, they called for this hand counting of ballots across 2,400 precincts statewide. And the Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, whose name, of course, is connected,
was on that phone call with Trump in 2020.
Even he was warning that this could cause significant delays and also pose some ballot security questions, too.
Well, and of course, this is one of these critical Sunbelt states we're now watching, as this is an expanded map for Kamala Harris compared to what was for Joe Biden. Another one of the Sunbelt states, Nevada, is interesting today as well. This court decision to keep Jill Stein of the Green Party off the ballot, noting this party has not had much success in the state of Nevada in cycles past. How significant could that be for Harris's chances there?
Well, this gives Harris a boost. And the reason why is that, like Georgia, Nevada is a very closely contested state. The Bloomberg Morning Consult poll taken after the Democratic National Convention showed just a 2-point lead for the vice president there. And anything could happen between now and November 5th. But having Stein on the ballot risks siphoning some votes away from Harris. So having her off the ballot really helps the vice president in her chances against Trump. And while Trump was not directly involved in this case for the Green Party, he did have an interest. And as it happened, his former lawyer, Jay Sekulow, was representing the Green Party in its bid to get the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn a state court ruling that prohibited the Green Party from having access to the ballot.
All right, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Now we turn to North Carolina as the governor's race there was upended yesterday when a story published by CNN detailed offensive comments allegedly made by the Republican candidate Mark Robinson in an online porn forum years ago. Joining me now with more from Raleigh is Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern, live in North Carolina this evening. And Annmarie, of course, you caught up with the current governor, Roy Cooper, and asked him about this. What did he tell you?
Absolutely. Kaylee, following this bombshell report, North Carolina has gotten potentially more challenging for former President Donald Trump, who will be here in North Carolina tomorrow. Most notably, who will not be attending his rally is Mark Robinson, this individual at the center of this report from CNN, where he was allegedly making these offensive comments. Now, what Roy Cooper, the sitting Democratic governor, said to me was that these comments are not surprising, but they are shocking. Take a listen.
I think for anyone who has been supporting, encouraging Mark Robinson, it's a liability, because voters are going to look at the fact that Donald Trump and these Republican leaders knew Mark Robinson character. They knew who he was, the kinds of things that he was saying. This is very on brand for Mark Robinson, and it should hurt their candidacies as well as Mark Robinson.
Governor Cooper thinks this will hurt Donald Trump in this state. J.D. Vance was here just days ago, of course, Trump's running mate, the senator from Ohio, and he said it'll be very hard to have a path to the White House without winning North Carolina. And Kaylee, just yesterday when this news came out, Larry Sabato of the Crystal Ball Report said that they had an emergency meeting and they moved that gubernatorial race from lean Democrat to likely Democrat. The big question is this just a temporary distraction, or potentially is this going to become a huge liability for the former president?
Well, and that does raise the question of how both candidates will be responding to this. Donald Trump, to this point, has not retracted his endorsement of Mark Robinson. But for Kamala Harris as well, who has been investing resources in North Carolina, she's done better in polls there. Does this change the money calculus at all? If this is already dominating the airwaves, does that actually mean she needs to spend less potentially?
Well, what they are doing for sure, and I've been watching the local news here, and I've been absolutely inundated with, on both sides, political ads. But for Kamala Harris, the second this report came out, you saw the news flow in the inbox on social media linking former President Donald Trump and his past statements about Mark Robinson, and also past statements and news articles about offensive comments Mark Robinson has said. So I think you're going to see a lot more time and attention played to this state, because they view this as potentially damaging to the former president, and Kamala Harris wants to flip this state blue. Remember, the only time that's ever been done really in modern times is the first Barack Obama presidency in 2008. Since then, they have not elected a Democratic president since 1976.
Yeah, he didn't win it even in 2012 when he won re-election. Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern live in North Carolina tonight. Thank you so much. Meantime, here in Washington, Congress is heading into the weekend with the government funding clock still ticking and just 11 days left to avert a shutdown. We spoke earlier today with Democratic Congresswoman from New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, about the path forward. Take a listen.
From what I am hearing, we are working together to get a continuing resolution passed that will be a clean continuing resolution. I would suspect it will go past this election so we can take it out of some of this partisan atmosphere and really get down to work in the lame duck session so we can get our appropriations passed before the new year.
Joining me now for more is Bloomberg's Megan Scully, who leads our congressional coverage. So, Megan, this is also our understanding of the plan, correct? A clean 3-month CR. How quickly could it pass, though?
It could pass quickly. I wouldn't say it's clean. I would say it's clean-ish. That's what they are negotiating right now and will be negotiating through the weekend. What we have seen up until this point, sort of the first act of this play, was a House Republican-only negotiated affair. And it involved a 6-month continuing resolution. It had Republican-sponsored language on it that would prohibit non-citizens from voting in U.S. elections, which Democrats contend is not a problem and was unnecessary. So essentially what we're doing now is those two measures have been defeated. There was concerns within the Republican Party about the length of the CR and some other things that were attached to it, even though former President Donald Trump supported it. Now they're regrouping. Now that we're getting closer to the deadline, we're still 10 days out, so I'm not expecting to see anything immediately. But we are looking maybe Tuesday, Wednesday next week for a House vote and then the Senate vote later in the week. The Senate has taken some steps already to get itself ready, the Senate being such a slow-moving organization. And so we could expect them potentially to move fairly quickly when they get the bill later in the week. Plus, members want to get home. They want to campaign. They do not want to be in Washington any longer. So I think that they're getting there. This past week was just a little bit of dinner theater.
All right, fair enough. Well, it is the campaigns I want to talk about as well, because for some of these incumbent senators and members of Congress that are running again, we've seen some interesting polling this week. The one that stuck out to me is Texas, where Ted Cruz, according to Morning Consult, is actually a point behind Colin Allred, surely within the margin of error, but still kind of a wow thing to see.
Sure, and it's very important to say it is within the margin of error. All the other statewide polls, Ted Cruz has been ahead, sometimes as much as 6 or 8 points, always within the single digits, though. But we are seeing Allred, we've seen him sort of steadily lessening that gap. And this was the first poll that had him ahead. He has a ton of money and is spending it on ads. And he's outspending Ted Cruz in the advertising market about 2.5 to 1. Wow. So, and we can expect to see that uptick continue the closer we get to Election Day. Now, Texas has always been a reach state for Democrats, so I don't think anybody at the DSCC is getting too excited about it, but it's certainly a sign of life in the Senate campaign down there.
All right, Bloomberg's Megan Scully, thank you so much for joining me. And coming up, we'll turn our attention to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Poland's Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski will join me next live on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
When it comes to Ukraine, France and the United States remain in total solidarity with our friends in Ukraine against the ongoing Russian aggression. And we talked about the months ahead and the work that we and so many other countries are doing to support Ukraine as it takes the necessary steps to be able to stand on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. That is the best measure of Ukraine's long-term success, and we're united in supporting its efforts.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reiterating allied support for Ukraine yesterday, ahead of the United Nations General Assembly in New York next week, where world leaders and officials will gather to discuss the ongoing war. I'm joined now by one of them here on Bloomberg TV and radio, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski. Thank you so much for coming back to see us in Washington before your trip to New York, sir. Obviously, it is a big forum, and many allies of Ukraine will be there at the General Assembly. What outcome are you hoping for?
I hope we'll reiterate UN support for Ukraine. Remember, the Russian invasion was condemned by a vote in the General Assembly in February 2022 by one of the largest majorities ever. That wasn't a press statement. That was to state the law, that the aggressor was in breach of UN Charter and in breach of its obligation as a permanent member.
Well, so when we consider the fact that this war now is ongoing for, it will be more than 3 years potentially, do you see that as fact that this is going to be a continuing concern for this body, for countries like yours, for the foreseeable future? Or are we reaching the point in which you could see an end?
Only one person can decide about that. Russia could end this war in 5 minutes by Putin making a phone call to his chief of staff to get the hell out of Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukraine and we don't have that option because it's Russia that is occupying Ukrainian territory. But we should stay the course. Up to 1 million people have already died or been injured in this war. It's the biggest war on the European continent since World War II.
Do you think if the U.S. were to change its view on the use of long-range strikes that Ukraine could use offensively into Russia, that could bring about a quicker and perhaps force Vladimir Putin to make the decision you suggest? It
would certainly help. I was in Kiev last week. On the way, I visited the Ukrainian city of Lviv and one of the buildings that was destroyed by a Russian caliber missile, in which a father saw the bodies of his wife and 3 daughters being brought out. Horrible. And Ukraine has the right and should have the technical ability to shoot down not only the missiles, but also the bombers that launch them, and also target the airfields from which they start. This is a completely legitimate self-defense, and we should help Ukraine do that.
And of course, that's the military portion of the equation. What about the diplomatic one? President Zelensky suggested recently that Crimea potentially could be solved through diplomatic channels or returned to Ukraine in that way. Do you see that?
Those are decisions up to President Zelensky. Poland and the European Union, NATO, we support Ukraine's territorial integrity because it was guaranteed in 1994 under the Budapest Memorandum by Russia, but also by the US and others, in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. And also remember, Ukraine and Russia have a border treaty solemnly signed and ratified by who? By President Putin.
I'd like to ask you, since we're here in the United States, about what is at stake for Poland in this election. This is actually something that was raised on the debate stage between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump just last week when she hit him specifically on the Polish population in Pennsylvania. This is what she said.
And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Sir, I understand you'll be spending some time with Polish Americans in other U.S. states while you're here as well, like Michigan.
We don't take sides.
Do they have a point? Does she not have a point? Should they not have reason to be concerned?
We don't take sides in the internal affairs of our great ally, but we are grateful to our community here for their role in persuading U.S. Senate to approve the treaty to enlarge NATO. NATO continues to be important, and I will therefore be asking our compatriots, Americans of Polish origin, to continue that support, that ecosystem of our alliance.
All right, I understand you not wanting to weigh in on the U.S.'s election, but Poland has one of its own coming up next year. Would you run for president?
I didn't expect that question, but the party I belong to hasn't made its decision. We think the election will be about security, because Poland is actually the only EU and NATO country that has both Russia and Ukraine as a neighbor. And if it is about security, then we will make personnel decisions, which have not yet been made.
But you won't rule it out.
But if I make a decision, I will certainly announce it in Poland and not necessarily on Bloomberg TV, much as I like you.
All right. Well, you can't blame me for trying, Minister. You've been very generous with your time today, and we appreciate your visit. Radoslaw Sikorski, the Foreign Minister of Poland, thank you so much, and safe travels to New York next week. And we would point out that this Monday, Fumio Kishida, Japan's prime minister, will be speaking on Bloomberg. That's coming up at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time Monday, so make sure to tune into that conversation right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. But before that, Bloomberg gets set to relaunch the iconic Wall Street Week tonight. I'll be joined by its anchor, David Westin, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
One thing is very clear is that the world is moving towards electric vehicles. We're seeing this in markets on all continents. And we want the United States automakers and workers to be leading the way. We want them to be dealt in. And it's their cues that I'm taking as a policymaker to put into place the infrastructure, the production capabilities, as well as the entire foundation that will see these transformations take place.
That was Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan, Haley Stevens, who is part of a story about the resurgence of Detroit and the engine behind it, the auto industry, on Wall Street Week, which is reintroducing itself tonight to audiences in a new format. And joining me now for more is David Westin, who hosts the program live from New York. So, David, we're very excited to see this new format in which you are telling stories. And it's not just telling stories through the lens of the Congresswoman, but auto executives as well.
No, exactly. This one is the story of Detroit in the auto industry, its decline and its attempt to come back. And, of course, EVs figure large in that. And Haley Stevens figures large, because, as you know, Kaylee, her district is the 11th district. It's just in northwest Detroit. It happens to be a place where Oprah Winfrey and Vice President Kamala Harris did their town hall meeting yesterday. So it's critical in that state. EVs are, and you noticed, if you listen carefully, she talked about the workers and their role in EVs. That's awfully important in southeast Michigan.
Yeah, well, and of course, we just heard this week from Donald Trump in a town hall in Michigan suggesting, and this is a quote, if he doesn't win, you will have no auto industry within 2 to 3 years. Did you sense any concern about that, David?
I think there is concern in general. We saw it when the UAW negotiated the last pact. It was one of the sticking issues was really EVs, because most people agree it'll take less workers, and that makes people very nervous. And that's led Donald Trump in the past to really come out against EVs. He was making those remarks in my hometown of Flint, Michigan, which has been decimated with all the job losses. So it's a big source of concern. And Haley Stevenson talking to us as part of this story really emphasized she's monitoring it very, very carefully. She thinks there's a role for the auto workers, but it has to be protected in an EV future.
Well, and of course, it's an ongoing conversation we're having here in Washington, and this is where tariffs come into play as well. It's Donald Trump in particular is floating the idea of up to 200% tariffs on EVs coming out of China. Is there a feeling in Michigan or in these kind of auto manufacturing centers that is net beneficial?
Well, one of the people we talked to was Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, and we talked specifically about the competition from China in EVs. And he says he's never seen anything like it. He actually started out working for Toyota, which was sort of like treason in Michigan back in those days. And then he's come back to Ford, where his grandfather had worked. But he says, look, it's up to us to make a better car for cheaper, and that's really hard, and we've got to do that. But he's never seen anything like the support the Chinese government's given electric vehicles, and he does, I believe, agree that there has to be some support from the government, as in fairness, President Biden is already doing with EVs from China.
All right, David, we just got a minute left, but what else is coming up on Wall Street Week tonight?
Well, we'll always be telling stories of capitalism one way or the other. One of them is the story of restaurants in New York City, what it takes to put a business together. And we'll also address the challenges to the business model of higher education. We've seen a lot of colleges going out of business or cutting back their programs. So we talked with Mitch Daniels, formerly head of the OMB, formerly governor of Indiana, about what he did at Purdue to try to get the costs under control. So that's all coming up tonight on Wall Street Week.
All right, Bloomberg's David Westin, looking forward to it very much. You can catch the new Wall Street Week tonight. It begins just about 30 minutes from now at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. But of course, we've still got to finish up Balance of Power first. And coming up, we'll take a look at the growing tensions in the Middle East following the pager and walkie-talkie explosions in Lebanon this week and Israeli strikes that were conducted again today, taking out another top Hezbollah commander. We'll have more ahead with Hagar Chemali, former director at the National Security Council and founder and CEO of Greenwich Media Strategies, next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
What is clear is that Israel, or I shouldn't say Israel, has claimed credit for it, but it appears that Hezbollah members have been targeted and they were asked to basically stand down on the northern front. They didn't, and then there was a second attack.
It's Iran that has backed Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria, Hamas in Gaza, with millions and millions of dollars of annual expenses, trained terrorists, given them hundreds, thousands of rockets with extensive ranges to do nothing except to accomplish one goal that Iran has and their terror networks, and that's wiping Israel off the face of the planet.
That was Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois and Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas yesterday here on Balance of Power, discussing the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah following the pager and walkie-talkie explosions in Lebanon this week. Joining me now for more is Hagar Chemali, founder and CEO of Greenwich Media Strategies and former director for Syria and Lebanon at the National Security Council. Always great to see you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Hagar, after we saw those electronics blasts earlier this week, today Israel says it killed a senior Hezbollah commander, another one in a strike just outside Beirut in the southern suburbs. It also is saying at the same time, though, that Israel is not seeking a broad regional escalation. But is that not already what is happening here?
Well, basically what they're saying is, while I believe that they're not actively or proactively seeking a broad escalation, because otherwise they would have done it by now, they are also communicating that they're not afraid of one. I mean, they're really cleaning up house. When these are Hezbollah leaders whose names I remember from back from when I handled Hezbollah back at the Treasury Department when I worked in counterterrorist financing. These are operatives and commanders and leaders who were part of the 1983 Marine barracks bombing that killed 241 U.S. servicemen. And so these are that you're talking about, really, they're going in there and they've had it. And they're telling them, we don't want you lobbing missiles at the north of Israel anymore. We want to return our citizens there very safely. And we're going to be tough about it. And we're not afraid to escalate this further. But you can also tell, I don't want to use the word restraint so much as they haven't gone all out just yet. But they are also communicating that they're not afraid to.
Okay, well, I guess it raises the question of what would drive them from being not afraid to do something to just making the decision to do it. Who has lesser incentive here for further escalation? Is it Israel or is it Hezbollah, who we understand of the Iranian proxies is the best arm and potentially the most capable of conducting harmful strikes against Israel?
Well, they might be the most capable of the proxies, but they're not really going to be, they can't compare to Israel if Israel has the help of the United States to intercept Hezbollah missiles into Israel. And Israel is counting on that. So now their defense minister was in Washington this week and told the United States that Israel doesn't believe anymore that diplomacy is going to make Hezbollah stop its military confrontations. Every single day since October 8th, Hezbollah has been lobbing missiles at the north of Israel. About 100,000 Israeli citizens have evacuated the north. And that's important to Israel, not just because those citizens want to return, but because it undermines their territorial integrity of their country if they don't have any presence there. And so they're very afraid that Hezbollah might pursue another October 7th style attack where they go in, there's some kind of invasion where they try to compromise that border. And the spokesperson said as much today, by the way. And so when they said that, they're saying, we don't think diplomacy has worked. It's been 11 months of Amos Hochstein's diplomacy in Lebanon. He has shuttled back and forth between Lebanon and the region and the United States with no results. And so Israel is saying, we think military action is the only way to push them back and to get them to stop doing this. So while Hezbollah really, it would be a significant war. I don't want to pretend it would be easy. And the United States doesn't want Israel to escalate, particularly before an election. At the same time, the U.S. has promised to defend Israel in any kind of escalation, and that means that likely we would try to help intercept missiles.
Well, and of course, all of this comes as the U.S. is still actively seeking a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, although it does feel, and perhaps just based off of the lack of communicated optimism on the part of U.S. officials in recent weeks, Hagar, that it's getting farther away, not closer.
Yeah,
is that also your understanding?
Absolutely. So this week was the first time I saw, it was very obvious to me that this week, in particular, when the defense minister told the U.S. that they were ready for military action with Hezbollah if needed, that they thought that it might be the only way. And then you saw the attack on Hezbollah operatives carrying these pagers and walkie-talkies. That, to me, signified that Israel, the Netanyahu government, does not believe that a ceasefire is achievable in the near future. And that's for a number of reasons. Part of it is Netanyahu's own demands and political interests. But it's also that Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, has committed publicly, including last week in a letter he sent to Hezbollah, to continue the fight and to continue the anti-Israel, anti-Zionism fight. And so neither side wants a ceasefire. Now, as the explosions of the pagers were happening, Secretary Blinken was in the region trying to come up with a new proposal with Egypt and Qatar. But the problem is, it was just a few days after that President Biden said he didn't believe it was going to happen, or the Biden administration said it wasn't going to happen likely before the election. And when you have that, when you don't believe something like that is coming soon, it also means that your focus on military action is going to be ever more prioritized.
Hagar, I'd like to ask you something else, and it does pertain to the region, but it's more domestic focused, because during a campaign event last night in which she was addressing specifically Jewish people at an anti-Semitism event, Donald Trump had this to say about reinstating a Muslim travel ban. Take a listen.
I will ban refugee resettlement from terror-infested areas like the Gaza Strip, and we will seal our border and bring back the travel ban. Remember the famous travel ban? We didn't take people from certain areas of the world because I didn't want to have people ripping down and burning our shopping centers and killing people. But we're not taking them from infested countries.
Hagar, does this kind of rhetoric or policy suggestion at home actually have an impact on what happens in these areas abroad? This is obviously a conversation we were having around the campus protests, for example, earlier this year, the notion that actually it may, because of expressed support for Hamas or the Palestinian cause, impact what's happening. Does it also have the reverse impact?
Well, so you have a few things happening at the same time, and I'm gonna start off by saying that while I understand the security concerns from a lot of countries all over the world, where you do have criminals and terrorists who actively try to come into our country, it's also very un-American to say to just come out with bans that flat out block certain countries altogether from the opportunity to come here. And you know, so on one hand, I do genuinely believe, and I say this as the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who achieved their American dream. And I believe very deeply that immigration is a key part of our country and our economy and our society. I also believe that the U.S. government has to be as tough as possible and vet people as much as possible to ensure that the people coming here want to come here for the right reasons, that they want to come here to achieve their American dream, to share in American values, to help our economy, to contribute to our economy and society. And they don't all want that, you know, and DHS makes that very clear. But I just don't think a ban helps. And that kind of rhetoric also doesn't help because it only fuels arguments that the U.S. is racist or that the U.S. is going to judge people based on their religion or their ethnicity. And so it's not the right message to make. And I don't think Trump has it right here at all. I do think, though, that there is a fine line, that there's a balance that we can achieve that, by the way, the U.S. achieves pretty well and has under multiple administrations. But we can always do better in ensuring that criminals don't come to our shores.
All right, Hagar, great to speak with you. As always, Hagar Chemali, founder and CEO of Greenwich Media Strategies. Thank you. And another related story that we're following this evening, Steve Eisman of Neuberger Berman and, of course, Big Short fame, has been placed on a leave of absence after posting remarks on social media celebrating, quote, the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza. Eisman deleted his X account and apologized yesterday on Bloomberg TV after predicting that Donald Trump would win the 2024 presidential election. Eisman actually rescinded that call, saying he now sees the race as a toss-up. Now, coming up, we'll move to a conversation with North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper as controversy engulfs one of the candidates in the race to succeed him. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Earlier this afternoon, Bloomberg's very own Annmarie Hordern sat down with North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. A timely interview in which they discussed everything from the presidential election to the controversy surrounding North Carolina's Republican gubernatorial candidate, Mark Robinson. Here's a piece of the conversation.
These comments were shocking, but they really weren't surprising for Mark Robinson. He has a history of these kinds of inflammatory comments that completely disrespect women, that incite violence. We've known for a while that he was someone who is unfit for office. Not only should he not have been elected to the office he's in, he certainly doesn't need to be governor of the state. I think it makes it even more certain that Josh Stein, our Attorney General, will be elected as governor. But I also think that Donald Trump and North Carolina Republican leaders have continued to encourage and support Mark Robinson, and now they're having to reap what they are sowing.
But is it a distraction in the short term, or is this a liability come November 5th?
Well, I think for anyone who has been supporting, encouraging Mark Robinson, it's a liability because voters are going to look at the fact that Donald Trump and these Republican leaders knew Mark Robinson's character. They knew who he was, the kinds of things that he was saying. This is very on brand for Mark Robinson. And it should hurt their candidacies as well as Mark Robinson's.
Do you think it will?
I believe that it will, yes.
So you think Kamala Harris could benefit from this?
Well, I believe even before this that Kamala Harris was on track to make history and win North Carolina. The last Democratic nominee was Barack Obama, who won North Carolina. This was Biden-Harris's closest loss in 2020, 1.3%. There's that same excitement that I felt in 2008 here in North Carolina in 2024. I think North Carolina can make history again. And I think this makes it more likely because Donald Trump has embraced Mark Robinson for quite a while. And he still, to this day, hasn't said anything negative about Mark Robinson.
Well, he'll be here tomorrow, so potentially he'll have to comment on it.
Yeah.
But just about winning North Carolina for the Democrats, you mentioned Barack Obama. He only won it, though, in 2008, only his first term. Why is this a state that is willing to vote for Democrats at the state level? You know, you've benefited from that, but not at the national level.
North Carolinians are very independent, and they will split their ticket. We've seen this time and time again, so this is not unusual. We're a very purple state. We're always going to be close. But I'll tell you this, Donald Trump has to win North Carolina in order to be president. If Kamala Harris can win this race here, and we believe she can, she's the next president of the United States.
The top issue in national and local polls has been inflation. Do you find that voters are more willing to blame the politicians in Washington, D.C. and not the local ones?
Well, people are frustrated with paying more at the grocery store. They're frustrated that their dollar doesn't go as far. But it's pretty clear that Kamala Harris has worked very hard to help control costs. She's worked to make sure that we've got better paying jobs for people. But now she came to North Carolina and rolled out her economic plan that's going to help small businesses, to help fight higher prices at the grocery store. I think that it is having an effect already, that inflation is cooling in our country. I think that's going to be positive for her, and I think people have listened to her and believe that she cares about middle class North Carolinians. Donald Trump only cares about the wealthy and corporations and himself.
So the rate of inflation has come down, but people are still struggling with the level of prices. That's not coming down. And a lot of things Kamala Harris talks about, you need congressional support, and it's very slim on details. Do you think she needs to dive deeper into the policy discussions?
So she's rolled out a very specific plan, but she's also aware that getting legislation through Congress requires a lot of work and consensus building. And she was a key part of the Biden-Harris administration that got through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the American Rescue Plan, CHIPS and Science, all of this legislation that's going to make generational investments. She was a part of doing it, cast the deciding vote sometime. She understands that she's going to have to get down into the details and find ideas that work. You know, people talk about trying to fight higher prices at the grocery store, and she's talked about trying to fight those prices. There are ways to do that. I'm excited about the fact that she's ready to take this on.
You can find the full conversation with North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper online or on the terminal. Coming up, we'll take a look at how the Harris campaign is responding to the allegations around Mark Robinson. We'll have more with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
and he's been an unbelievable Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson.
For me, there's no compromise on abortion.
I think you're better than Martin Luther King.
We could pass a bill say you can't have an abortion in North Carolina for any reason. Abortion in this country, it's about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down.
I've been with him a lot. I've gotten to know him, and he's outstanding.
Donald Trump and Mark Robinson. They're both wrong for North Carolina.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
That was a new ad from the Harris campaign following the CNN article that came out with allegations against North Carolina gubernatorial candidate Mark Robinson, including that he posted he was a black Nazi and, quote, perv in an online forum years ago. He has denied making those statements. But joining me now for more, our political panel, Maura Gillespie, founder and principal at Blue Stack Strategies, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Maura, first, I have to go to you as the Republican on the panel. Donald Trump is going to be in North Carolina tomorrow. Does he need to disavow, disendorse, get as far away from Mark Robinson as he can, and do you believe he will?
He absolutely should. I don't know that he will. I think he is, unfortunately for Republicans, the president's major focus is himself. And if he feels as though that it would make him look bad to take back what he endorsed, he's not going to even mention Mark Robinson, perhaps, and just focus on himself and what he would bring to North Carolina and why people should vote for him. But it would be a point of pride for him to bring up Mark Robinson, I think, and disavow anything. Should he? Absolutely. The party needs him to. Top leaders of the Republican Party have asked him to, and have asked Mark Robinson not only to drop out, but then to prove it wasn't him, because Mark Robinson has said that it wasn't him that posted these things, although I did just see that those posts, Politico is reporting that those posts have been taken down. So if it wasn't Mark Robinson who took down his post, I think it's really just it's a real big mess, and it reminds me of being with Boehner because when this is Chris Lee from New York, when he was posted on, this is a real throwback, but Craigslist, there were some photos of him on Craigslist, and within hours, Boehner, former speaker, had him in the office, told him, "You're resigning today." And within hours, Chris Lee did so. So I think it's really a stark contrast between what leadership used to be able to do for decency and now what we're seeing play out on the Republican fringe.
So it might be a little bit challenging for Donald Trump in North Carolina tomorrow. Meanwhile, today, Jeannie, Kamala Harris was in Georgia talking about reproductive freedom specifically, but it also comes on the day that Georgia's state election board voted for new rules that will require the hand counting of ballots. This could delay the results for weeks in that state. How consequential is that decision?
It's very consequential, and we are seeing this particularly in swing states like Georgia, where you have Republican-led boards, and in this case supported strongly by Donald Trump, who are taking steps that nonpartisan folks in the state who are experts in how we access, how we distribute, and how we count ballots to make sure the election is transparent and fair, have said, over and over again, this is not a smart move. And we heard that again today in Georgia. So it's entirely consequential. And of course, Kamala Harris down there on the heels of talking to Oprah Winfrey last night to focus on the issue of abortion and the fact that she is claiming that the 6-week rule in Georgia resulted in the deaths of 2 young women. And there was a very emotional discussion with the woman's mother and sister on Oprah Winfrey and Kamala Harris's rally, in their rally yesterday. So she's going down there to underscore what is for her a winning issue and has been troubling for Republicans.
We only have about 90 seconds left, but I want to get an answer from both of you on this. Nevada, the Supreme Court ruling Jill Stein, the Green Party, will not be on the ballot. Jeannie, does that make a material enough difference for Kamala Harris in that state?
We don't know yet, but it very well could, because Jill Stein certainly cost Clinton the election in 2016, and she could have done the same in in Nevada. So it is helpful to the Harris team.
Well, and so the Trump team then, Maura, looking at potentially having to spend more resources there in addition to states like North Carolina and Georgia. Is there really enough of it to go around?
Again, he has been pretty lackluster in having staffed up these states. They don't have enough campaign headquarters in these really important states that he needs to win. I think he was, assuming that he had them in the bag, or he just doesn't really care because, as I said on this program before, part of me doesn't think that Donald Trump actually wants to win the election. I think he wants to complain about it being fraudulent. He's setting up the framework for that. And he wants to be able to fundraise off of this for the next 4 years and still have control over the Republican Party by saying he is going to be the candidate in 2028. So that could be his plan here.
All right, Maura Gillespie and Jeannie Shanzano. Wish we had more time with you ladies this evening, but thank you so much for joining me, our wonderful political panel on this Friday. And of course, for more coverage, you can check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find that on the terminal and online. It's been quite a week. Crazy to believe the Fed decision was just 2 days ago as the political headlines fly thick and fast. So thank you for getting your news on that from us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next week.